Yeah, so the first question will be actually who came up with the idea for that Astra?
Okay, this is a tricky question because the idea actually developed from the original idea into a concept that was probably 20% similar to the original idea that we had when we first started. The actual Adastra idea is 7 years old. It was based on an idea I had a couple of years ago when I was in a band about writing a story rather than just music. It was actually about writing a story based on the experiences of people that travel into space. From my past, I've always been interested in like the kind of human experience, the human kind of stuff that goes on between different kind of classes and societies and cultures. So with this story, the original idea with Adastra was that when travelling into space, some people would be in cryosleep, whereas others would be like the caretakers of the ship. They would look after the people in cryosleep. One of the big features of this idea or this story would be that there's a class divide between rich and poor. So if you're rich, you get to go into cryosleep, you get to wake up at your final destination God knows how many years later and still be the same you that got into the cryo chamber at the beginning. Whereas all the people on the ship that were looking after those people in cryo chambers would go through several generations of people before they actually got to their destination, so it would be their great-great-grandchildren that would get there. And what I wanted to explore with the idea originally was this class divide between rich and poor, and also the experiences that all the poor people go through on the ship. So it's almost like a representation of Earth with poor and rich, but on a spaceship traveling to another planet. Eventually, this idea changed though. Once people were on board with the project, it became more of a Greek tragedy based around two people. Which if you were at our final show on May the 24th, 2013, you would have seen. Yeah, it turned into a Greek tragedy from something that was probably quite political to begin with.
Yeah, and you chose to make it like more futuristic rather than, I don't know, some kind of Victorian England type of project.
I think the whole future idea was, because I've always been interested in science fiction. One of my favourite bands is Carried in Cambria, and I kind of learnt to play guitar with them as well. Before I got into electronics, I was into guitar. And their stories are not the same, but they're similar in the sense that there's some kind of mission that they need to accomplish, and there's things that they find out along the way that fill in the story. So again, with regards to your question, the whole science fiction thing is something that's always been with me. So it kind of naturally just found its way into the project.
How did you form the team?
The team was formed about 8 months ago. I was already thinking about the project in June 2012. I was already thinking of who I was going to work with and what kind of skills and advantages I would have with working with certain people. One of the people I knew I definitely wanted to work with was Ian Fisher, straight away. He's a guy that writes stories, he reads a lot of stories as well. And I knew that because of the kind of nature of our project, he was going to be an absolute gem when it came to actually creating the story and building the kind of world in which these characters existed. Jake, me and him had already agreed to work together way before we'd even started uni last year. We've known each other for 3 years. Before he came to Coventry, we were in a band. We'd agreed to work together in a band before he got here, and yeah, he was already on board. It just took a bit of time to get Ian interested.
How about Greta?
Greta,
She was the absolute star in the end of the show.
She was the star of the show. This was quite difficult because, again, we're music students. We don't really deal with theatre or any other kind of disciplines, and it's a shame at university. I think there should be more of that. But we originally tried to email a lot of people in the theatre department to try and generate interest. No one got back to us. So eventually we had to go into a classroom and do a mini presentation in which only one person got back to us afterwards, and it was Greta. And as soon as we saw her, we knew she was the perfect person for the project. So in my head, I had this image of the kind of person I was thinking of, the girl on the ship, and she was perfect. When she turned up, she was just spot on.
You said it took you about 8 months to create the finished project.
Yep.
Was the outcome as you imagined it, or did changes occur over time?
When we began the project, it was very different from what I'd originally had in my head. I thought that this whole project was going to be between two robots on a spaceship, discussing whether they're going to kill the people on board or whether they're going to keep them alive. Kind of in the themes of Macbeth as well. Most people have looked into Macbeth. I don't really know the story. All I know is that there's two sides and one eventually wins. But I kind of wanted to incorporate that somehow into the computer in its craziness. But with development over time, that eventually changed from being two crazy robot computers fighting over saving what were, if you like,
a more personal story.
Yeah, into a more kind of just between two people rather than between societies or cultures.
But the idea still exists.
Yeah, that idea does still exist.
Did you get a good reception?
I think we did. The room could have been bigger, but it's something that we'd look at in the future. If we did this project again, we'd increase the capacity of the venue. I think we had a full house for the night. And at the end, I think everyone enjoyed it. Our feedback so far has been pretty good from our lecturers, and both from people that watched the show and also who got to see the video online. So I was quite happy with the feedback, and I'm quite confident that it was a success.
Yeah. How about the music? Tell me more about your rehearsals. How did you come up with the ideas? Did you improvise a lot?
A lot of the show was actually improvised. There was a few sections which were pre-planned, which still took a lot of sound design. For example, the spaceship at the beginning, that went through 2 different drafts before we settled on a final result. In the final show, we didn't have to manage the spaceship as much. It was simply a case of playing the sample, and that would play through before we had to actually start improvising and performing the show. But of all the projects that we were doing, that probably took the longest. That was like several months of messing around with different sounds, finding what worked. We tried different things from tonal sounds, music, to an actual just sound design, a soundscape of the spaceship taking off. Later on in the project, the more kind of musical stuff that we did was very much improvised. Literally the week before we did our final show, the 2 main parts of the project with the guitars, the music and the drums was improvised, and we followed a very skeletal structure when it came to actually performing it.
Are you planning to make it bigger and develop it in the future into, I don't know, a movie or a bigger play or something like this? I don't know what ideas you have.
This is something we have discussed, again based on the feedback of what people have said to us. A lot of people recommended this to us afterwards, that we should take it further. Unfortunately, not all of us live in the same city, so it's one of those. We'd have to consider the logistics of being able to do it, but it's something I'd really like to do in the future. I think it could go further. I'm already looking into other ways of promoting this story, because as you are aware, maybe not many of the people that will be reading this blog, but there's several different projects that have happened in different time zones in this story. One is set in the present time, our time. One is set in the future, which is our Adastra story. And between those 2 projects, we've got about 37 years to play with.
Okay.
So there is definitely, most likely, going to be more projects in the future.